Welcome to Home Health 360, a podcast presented by Care. I'm your host, Jeff Howell, and this is the show about learning from the best in home health care from around the globe.
Hi, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Home Health 360 podcast, where we speak to home health professionals from around the globe. I'm your guest host, Erin Vallier, Regional Director of Sales for Care Software, and today I'm joined by two special guests from Amity Healthcare Group, Irina Gorovaya and Lourdes Wiley. They're here to talk about the role and impact of competency programs in home health. Irina is the owner and president of Amity Healthcare. She has been a registered nurse for over 10 years and has over 20 years of extensive healthcare experience, including long-term, subacute, acute care, and home health, and has served in a variety of roles, including owner-administrator. Irina is an ACHC and CHAP certified healthcare consultant with a focus on home health and hospice. And presently, she provides expertise in the areas of regulatory compliance, including Medicare accreditation nationwide, as well as home health and hospice industry education. Welcome to the show, Irina.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So glad to have you. And Lourdes is a clinical educator and consultant at Amity with over 20 years of experience as an RN. Her career began in adult and pediatric critical care and included experiences in surgical and medical, ICU, as well as hematology and oncology. After leaving the acute care environment in 2006, she has been serving as a clinician, leader, and educator in home health and hospice settings. Lourdes has also served as faculty for nursing programs in the Denver metro area at the LPN, BSN, and ADN levels. And in her present role, she is passionate about education and supporting nurses in delivering quality, holistic care to their patients. Welcome, Lourdes.
Thanks, Erin. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us.
Oh, I'm so excited. Well, Irina and Lourdes, before we just dive right into the subject at hand, can you share with our listeners a bit more about how you arrived at your passion for nursing competency? And how has that passion evolved into some of the interesting training programs that you offer today at Amity?
Thank you, Erin, for the question. And thank you for using the word passion in it, because I think it could be sort of a short answer to your question, right? It's a passion thing. It's passion about things that frequently get ignored in our industry, yet they have a tremendous value that we kind of forget about. And competency is very much one of those things. So very often we think about competency, it's a burden, a formality, it's just a check off, just another regulation kind of have to go by. And then we truly forget about, the impact it has on patient outcomes, the impact it has on, satisfaction of our staff. So that's kind of sort of where the beginning came from, the idea. And then I think, I've been lucky enough to kind of be in different spectrums of things, right? As an owner and administrator of a home health agency. For many years, I had a perspective of, well, this is how I handle things, in competency department, and this is how I should have handled things or wished I could have. And then I think Lourdes and I both now have sort of experience as consultants, right, and clinical educator for Lourdes to see how other agencies are doing it or maybe not doing it. So having this different perspective kind of allowed us to see that the gap is there, not only how we approach the competency, but also gap for services, right? If the agency on their own struggles to manage the robust competency program within their organization, there is no really many resources and not like the resource that we're providing that they can go to and have competency done elsewhere. And of course, with COVID, I think it kind of pushed us a little bit more, to think about not just local market here in Colorado, but nationwide, where the agency struggled with staffing and PPE, and PPP, and, managing their patients and staff during such a struggle, difficult time. We decided, okay, we need to do something where they can outsource things that still, need to be done, but maybe it's not their priority at that moment. And so spreading this product to nationwide was sort of another step. So kind of putting all those items together, this is kind of where we are right now.
Yeah.
I'd love to I guess, tail into that. I love the word passion. I'm glad that you brought that up and we're kind of dealing with that. I think passion's kind of a good descriptor for how we approach this competency program. I think that, and we'll probably talk about that in our time together, but I think when we think of competency, we think either it's an obligation or a drudgery or, oh no, I got to go do that again kind of thing. And I think we offer a unique spin on that, especially at a time where I think passion is a huge problem in our industry. People, it's well talked about, right? We're everybody's burnt out. We have a lot of clinicians actually transitioning to home health is what we're finding, and even new grads transitioning to home health is even a first step because people are hesitant to work in the environments, in the hospitals and the facilities, after what COVID has changed and what the morale and the staffing is like out there and all that kind of thing. And so I think passion is a word that is one of my key descriptors when it comes to what I do. And if I can even in our short time together infuse a little bit or find a little bit or renew a little bit of that passion for what we do for helping patients and being who we are, I'm just going to plug that in right now. Because if you attend a session here, we try to make it, I think, a bit about passion versus just the dry, annual, robotic, let's check the box thing, So, yeah, sorry, I got jazzed about passion. I just love that word.
No, I love it. You guys had a passion for something and you saw a gap, saw a problem, and you're solving it with the things that you offer. And that's how all great businesses are created. So I love that. You also said something interesting to me that I didn't realize was going on because I have a home health background too. And when I was in it, it was the opposite. Nurses wanted to go into a more clinical setting, like an acute setting, because they had more supervision and they were new and they're like, oh my God, I got to learn all my stuff before I can be out in the wild, because the Wild West was like home health. And so you're saying that kind of that paradigm has changed. They don't want to be in the clinical setting because of COVID. What do you think is driving that?
We are definitely seeing a shift. And while I don't think it's that nurses don't want that clinical foundation, and as an educator and as a seasoned nurse, I would still say try to get some of that because it'll help you when you're, in the Wild West of home health in a way. So Erin, what we're actually seeing is a lot of burnout. I'll give you an example. We had a gentleman come in for his competency. We do them virtually and in person here locally. And so I had a brilliant young man come in who had just graduated from his BSN program. He had been an EMT for a number of years, currently works in the emergency room at one of the let me not say where he works, but one of the local facilities. And it's interesting because I've taught for many years, and typically when you have someone who's worked like, paramedic, EMT, they thrive. They want to do ER. They want to go do flight nursing. They want to do all that exciting stuff. And I asked him, I said, why are you coming to home health right out of school? And he said to me, well, it's just really hard right now. It's really stressful. There's no joy. There's never enough people. We're all frightened at times because of staffing, because everybody's exhausted, because of everything that we're hearing. And so he felt comfortable at least giving it a try. And so he accepted a full-time home health position as his first nursing job, which, when you're doing visits like that, that's brave. That's brave to do. And so back to that passion, I really kind of tried to, empower him. He was really open about where his limitations were as well as his strengths. And, when folks like that leave here, I give them my contact information. I say, please don't hesitate to reach out if you need a pep talk, if I can help you with some skills sheets, off whatever it is you need. We're all in this together. And we really want people to feel that support. So back to your original question, I think people are just feeling that burnout and that hard environment right now in those settings, and they're wanting to get that breath of fresh air because, hey, at least it's one patient in front of you at a time. At least I think that's our hope, right? Is that it's going to be a little bit more manageable, where they're feeling there's a sense of bleakness and a lot of loss of hope in a lot of the acute care environments and the facilities, even long-term care is what we're hearing from people who come from those settings.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. There's it's more intimate. It's one-on-one. It's a little bit slower. And if you're in the home, then it's not as acute. So maybe, yeah.
I think that's what they're hoping to find,
I get it.
More manageable, that it'll make them feel like, well, this is why I want to be a nurse kind of thing, because that's kind of lost out there right now. It really, really is.
Wow. That's an interesting perspective. Well, ladies, let's talk about what you're doing and the importance of what you're doing. Can you share with the listeners, what the primary role of competency programs in home health is to begin with?
So I guess, you can look at it in two ways, right? If you want to kind of form a more drier terminology on that, or the role of competency is truly to have a strategy to determine that the staff that you have, or bringing on board, have skills and knowledge within their scope of practice that are required for them to be successful. So this is kind of formal, right? What we're expecting. In an informal way, I try to look at this, and Lourdes, feel free to add on to this. But so one of my friends and industry colleagues, when I've met her first time, she said something that always stuck with me. She said, home health staff, we're just like firefighters. We put out fires, but we do little to prevent those fires. Mm-hmm. And I feel this competency could be one of the methods that we can utilize to prevent fire. So if we look at the role of competency as fire prevention or prevention of, potential complications, I think it will, may kind of give you a different perspective, because by having a robust program, even within the organization, or, outsourcing it to somebody like, our organization, you setting up a ground, not only to ensure that you have a skilled and knowledgeable personnel, but also that the personnel may be satisfied and, as a result, may have better retention within the organization. And the most importantly, why we're all in this industry, is better patient outcomes, right? If I have better knowledge, better skills, better understanding of certain things, I am set on the road of success to provide better care. And to me, this is the biggest role, what we trying to do with the competency program, and try to kind of change that mindset of home health leadership, that this is why you need to have that in place.
Yeah, what we do is we're offering a way to fill a requirement. Let's break it down, I guess, to simplistic, because even when I've been in leadership positions, we all know we have to do it. In home health, the rules and regulations tell us we have to have initial and annual staff competencies, right, for clinicians. They are not very specific at all in terms of how that is accomplished, what that looks like. And I think what Irina and I are trying to hone in on is, how do we take this requirement that we all need to do? One, make it enjoyable, make it almost like a professional development style, of learning for nurses who attend, for CNAs who attend, because this follows them anywhere, right? So through doing this thing you have to do, can you take it from it being, again, drudgery, box checking event, to something that improves maybe staff retention, staff confidence, right? All of that drives quality. All agencies are required to have quality, right? To have good outcomes. It's measured. We have satisfaction scores, all this stuff, right? So how can we take that to build into that? And I believe there's some statistics Irina might have on hand, actually, that are specific to some of that, to retention. Because I think one challenge that all home health agencies, and in the long time that I've been in this industry, has always been a thing, right? That turnover. And I think there's a hesitancy sometimes to invest in this kind of thing in terms of time and whatever money it takes to do these competencies from owners and leadership, for fear that, wow, we're going to invest in these folks, but then they're going to turn around and go somewhere else. But how can we, I would argue, twist that, knowing that we're always going to have turnover no matter what we do right now? How do we minimize that by making this something that makes people feel like, wow, you're investing in me. You're making me a better nurse. I feel better about my job. I want to come to work. I want to stay here. Versus you just, don't really care. I'm kind of a body being sent out to see another body. Nobody wants to feel like they're in that position.
Right. Absolutely. I think you make some very valid points. So it sounds like, just to summarize, the role of competency is not just some judgery, not just some regulation. It's more comprehensive. Yeah, it checks all the boxes, but it also has these downstream impacts on everything: operations, outcomes, company morale. So it's a super important element of any healthcare business, and quite frankly, you have to do it. And I think our listeners would agree that it's super essential, not only from that regulatory standpoint, but from that quality and safety standpoint. But you said something very early on that makes me believe that not all agencies have this kind of program in place. Is that the case? And if there's any of those folks listening that don't have a formal or a real solid competency program in place, what is the risk to them if they don't take action to establish that program in their agency?
So, again, if we go back to basics, well, risk of not being in compliance with regulation, but again, it's just probably the minimal part of it, right? Because the value is so much more. There is a risk of not have skilled staff, which doesn't play well with the patient care outcomes. And again, we might be repeating ourselves a little bit, talking about it, but even just as an example, and, was kind of try to see, what other agencies doing, what they're not doing, and how they approach things. So an example being personally from my career as a home health owner, one of the nurses just refused, for example, to do anything else but one specific task. And her task of choice was doing subacute injections. And so all insulin cases, that's all she wanted, right? I hope she's not listening. But
you didn't say her name. So
yeah, I didn't say the name. But, so my mistake that I felt that I've done is I haven't pushed her hard enough, within the reasonable, right, pushing to learn more, to get better, to expand her knowledge. And I feel like if I've done a better job with this, maybe in a more structured manner, like competency program, I think she could have learned other things that she could have taken with her to other agencies, to other, clinical settings and stuff like that. So that is where it's important. So we're expanding, the skills, the knowledge, what I can do, and how confident I feel with it as well. If we are not teaching our nurses, for example, it's not just nurses, therapists, any direct care staff, but nurses just take the big part of it, right? Because this is, just the type of industry. Let's say I haven't taught my nurse how to do or checked if she's able to do Foley catheter insertion correctly. And then so many months down the road, I find that I have UTIs associated with this particular staff member. Is it the nurse's fault, or is it fault of the leadership that we have not invested enough in preparing her or him to be successful, right? Because we haven't provided proper education, support, competency evaluation, and things of this nature. So this is, big risk, right? Because now we're potentially taking it down to, inappropriate patient outcomes, adverse situations, and things of this nature. And now this nurse could be very upset with the fact that, oh my gosh, he has become a cause of the infection for so many patients. But again, this particular person may not feel that anybody supported her within the agency, right? Determine this is maybe her weakness or the area of, growth that is needed. Without support, there's no confidence, there's no, commitment. And so the risk of losing this particular staff member is always there. Most likely the staff member will leave this agency and will go elsewhere. Well, now they will be seeking to have a little bit more support and dedication, to their success. So to me, those are the, the primary risks for that.
So you asked us in terms of the norm with agencies. I can tell you, I've been a field nurse, I've been a clinical director, and as a field nurse, it was, you had some basic stuff. You might have an in-service, you might have somebody sign you up on a checklist, but the norm was, go figure it out. We need you to see this patient. And, I was doing this back in the day. I'm going to date myself here. Okay. This is before smartphones and YouTube. I wish I had YouTube when I was doing this. So there's a plus there, right? If you know which YouTube to look at. But the point is, we shouldn't be learning just on the fly. That's actually dangerous. On a good day, I might have somebody help me a little bit in the office, and then I meet a nurse out there who knows what he or she is doing, and hopefully they teach me right. But there was never a lot of formal, hey, this is the clinical procedure, right? These are a couple ways to do this correctly. What are you looking at? I've seen that be the norm way more than not, and it's unfortunate. When I was clinical director, it was a little bit more in the private duty sector. And the benefit there was the nurses had assigned patients, right? So there was a lot more control in terms of, we know what this patient has, they have a family that's providing the care. So based on my experience of being thrown to the wolves, I was able to creatively craft a learning, competency-based program, because we were forced to hire nothing but new graduates. It was pediatric home care. And if we didn't do that, we couldn't grow. We couldn't find the nurses to do what we needed to get done and to take care of the patients. And that still exists out there. The one thing, moving to present, that I can say, I guess I can call it evidence-based, even though I haven't done a formal study. Since Irina and I do so much work with the consulting piece, for example, I audit a ton of records as part of what I help her with on the consulting side with the agencies that we service. And so I'm able to see firsthand what's happening in terms of knowledge deficit. Let's use wound care as an example. When I am looking at clinical records, I continuously see things like wounds worsening, inconsistent care, not following orders. The record tells me the nurse doesn't understand, for example, that something like maceration. So they'll be describing this whiteness around that wound, that area, right? And you can see in the record, they're not making the connection that that's not a good thing, and they're not reporting it, right? And then the wound continues to get worse. So part of the beauty that I think what makes us unique is that since we do the consulting as well as the competency, which is really education in a way, right? We aren't just talking out of our, talking head. I'm the teacher. It was in the textbook. It was on this, no. We actually are teaching it based on what we see. And in fact, a benefit I'm going to plug now that I would encourage people to include in their competencies, or what we do in our competency, we actually teach nurses. Being specific to nurses, hey, this is the top 10 things that get your agency in trouble. For example, when it's survey time or when a complaint survey happens. So we're arming them with the why. Why is it important for you to tell me I should be aware of this? Why? And then kind of go with that. And I think it makes it very, and again, go back to the drudgery, it isn't boring in the sense that, hey, this is real life. This is happening. I'm going to see this, because the patients are getting way more complex. When I see these charts, these patients in the home setting right now are a train wreck compared to what I used to get when I was in the field a decade ago. And again, going back to COVID, right? They're not letting them stay in the hospital. They're sending them out, or they're not letting them even get admitted maybe when they should. So we have nurses who are also dealing with a much higher acuity of patient, more complex, seeing more patients. So that competency piece becomes even more critical for safety, to avoid complaints, for the agencies, to avoid, again, nurses. We hear of nurses throwing up their hands saying, I'm out, forget it. This is not okay, because they're not prepared to deal with what they're experiencing and finding out there in the home visits.
Wow. It sounds like there's a lot to lose. There's a lot of risk in not providing or supporting your staff with the required education. I'm curious though, because I know you do a lot of work in the Medicare and Medicaid space, so it's a bit more regulated than the private duty nursing. And Lourdes, you just mentioned you had some private duty experience. Is there any difference in the standard or requirement for competency programs between like a Medicare certified agency and just your run-of-the-mill, like private pay, private duty nursing agency?
No, the agency that I managed was Medicare, Medicaid certified. And in fact, when we underwent our initial ACHC accreditation years ago, I vividly remember, this is one of the reasons, Erin, I'm glad you asked that, why we launched our competency program then. So I'll backtrack. Up until that point, it was a little bit more private Medicaid straight. It wasn't accredited and certified yet. The world was changing, right? So that was actually something that hadn't been happening. When we had our survey, the ACHC surveyor looked at me and said, so how do you competency your nurses? I said, competency of my nurses. Well,
What's that?
Here's the training and orientation. That was the verbiage I used. Here's the training and orientation we provide. And she said to me, no, I'm looking for proof of competency. How do you? And that's how I first found this out. And this is, over a decade ago.
Okay.
And so to answer your question, I don't know if it's not, because I've really never worked in a world that wasn't regulated in that way. But that was how it became, because it was that important. And so what I would, I guess, say if it wasn't that situation, Erin, is that typically the expectation trickles down a little bit, right? So like home health agencies eventually end up being held to standards that maybe hospitals are being held to, and nothing gets easier, right? So I think you can't go wrong, regardless of where you're regulated or where you're funded, with doing the right thing. And then you never get in trouble, right? Because then you're open to your growth. You're open to whatever else you open the door to. But in terms of that skilled need, I think it's pretty universal that's an expectation and a requirement, regardless of your accrediting body.
Gotcha. And I think it's super important to provide it, even if it's not a highly regulated niche, like self-regulate, right? Because it has amazing impact on your community and beyond that. But it sounds like there's a lot of misconceptions around skills competency in general. Can you share like what are the most common reasons why this feels like drudgery? Like what are the misconceptions, and how can we perceive this differently so that we get excited about it? Because it sounds pretty exciting to me. If I'm a nurse and you're going to teach me how to be a rock star nurse, then that makes me feel good. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So here's my take on that, I think. Nobody wants to be that person that is just thrown to the wolves necessarily all the time, right? And so what makes it drudgery, I think, is that we feel like, oh, it's a requirement. I've got to do this. Here's how you do that. I think you want to approach it. I guess I can tell you how we approach it a little bit. Maybe that'll help. I don't think anybody learns well just by hearing instructions or watching just a video, right? You got to incorporate different things. And so how we work with our competency here is we want to kind of unearth what people know, right? So there may be some discussion, there may be some demonstration, but like I rely on the nurses in the group that I'm working with to kind of guide me on, hey, what's the next step? Now, if they're totally off base and incorrect, I will tell them what I would do and why, what's evidence-based, right? But I try to get them to kind of learn from each other as well. So it's not I'm just coming in, kind of like you do your CPR certification every 2 years. You know what you're doing, it's the same thing, and now you got to go do those compressions on the mannequin. How do we make it a little bit different than that? So I think part of it is kind of stimulating that creativity, because with nursing, sometimes there's a lot of different ways to do something, even in CNAs, right? There's different ways to do things correctly, and we're going to customize it to that patient and also to the comfort level. Am I answering your question correctly, Erin? I might have spaced.
Oh, it was just about misconceptions, like,
Yes.
Why are we thinking incorrectly about competency?
Yes, because it's boring.
That impacts our ability to do it and enjoy it.
It does because we think, okay, so I'm to blame. I'm here. I'll give you an example. In most of my, so I'll go back to more of my hospice experience. One hospice I worked at was large, and the competency program there was fantabulous. It was extensive. I don't know if they're still investing that much time, but it was very interactive. It was hands-on. It was sharing ideas. It was changing things. It wasn't that, let me just sit there and kill you by PowerPoint, or here, just go from skills to skills, and if you get it, you get it. Just touch it, sign you off by, So this particular competency really kind of stimulated my excitement about changing things up within agencies, because it was so varied, right? As learners, some of us are more visual, some of us are more auditory, some are more kinesthetic. And even when I teach or lead competency sessions, here's what's cool. I always have a variety of people. Sometimes I have new grads who have learned something a certain way, or nurses with 30 years experience. I walk away learning new stuff from my attendees, which helps me stay current and learn, and then I can share that with others. I'm not going to act like I'm some, sage on a stage expert here. We're all learning from each other. So a good competency takes away that it's only right or wrong. It's the sage on a stage telling you what to do. Or here's the worst kind of competency, and I won't name brands. At my other hospice, competency was sitting on an automated system where you watched the video and you took the quizzes. And some of the videos, by the way, you could fast forward and just take the test, and some you had to suffer through the whole thing. And because none of us wanted to be doing it, it was super boring, right? We were all like, hey, can I skip through this one? So there's no value if I'm not even able to glean from that content and absorb that content, right? So I think a good competency, whether you're outsourcing it or you're offering it to your own staff, is just to consider, don't make it boring, make it relevant. Part of the beauty of the regs being gray is that you do have the ability to be kind of creative. So customize that competency to the types of clients that you're taking care of. If you're seeing a ton of wound vac patients, go nuts with wound vac stuff, right? Don't make it that repetitive, oh, okay, fine. Try to target it and include the staff. And you know what? When I facilitate that way, it's easier for me too to have my participants participate. And I'm not the one putting out all that energy all the time, just delivering all of it. That's super exhausting. They're going to retain it more. They're going to appreciate it more. We don't have people leave here without some kind of smile or nice thing to say. And I believe it's because we make them part of that. And here's the other thing. If I'm sitting in front of a video and I'm just waiting to take the quiz, seriously, right? If I'm in a setting where I feel a little put on the spot because I realize that my facilitator is going to ask me some questions or that my colleagues are going to look to me for some information, I'm going to have a little bit of stress response, not in a bad way, right? Enough fight or flight that I'm going to be on. And when we're on in that way, we also retain more in our brain. We invest more of ourselves, right? Because we know we're going to be called upon versus that very passive. So my long-winded answer is don't make it passive, right? Use all the senses, use the different styles of learning, make it relevant. That's what makes a good competency. And you don't need a ton of time to do it. It's really how you do it, and then give them the tool. So when I deem a nurse safe and competent, it's because I know he or she may not have all those answers in the field, but now they're empowered to find their resources, to ask me, to ask whoever their agency. Because that's what you want. You're not going to develop, I don't want people or agencies to think that you have to invest enough time to make them expert walking out the door. That's not what we do. We make them competent in that they are safe. They know what to look for. They know how to ask. They walk out of here knowing strengths and limitations, and then it's on them to do that. And that makes them want to go do a better job.
And your passion for it is coming through for sure. No, I love it. No, she's preach. So Irina, you and I spoke very recently at an ACHC webinar about professional development, and how we can specifically use some of these programs to improve employee retention. I know from research that when employees feel like they're being invested in, they do tend to stick around longer. They do a better job. But again, we've been talking a little bit about this, competency program has a different stigma to it. So in my experience in home health, like spun in that competency jargon that way, it's not always perceived by the employee in a positive light. And we've been talking about how we can change that, because it's seen by a lot of people as still drudgery, something they have to do just to earn a shift. So my question for both of you, are the competency programs that we've been talking about to date fundamentally different from what we are now calling professional development or employee engagement programs? Is there a fundamental difference? And, if there is, how can we change that common perception?
I wouldn't say there's a fundamental difference. The way I look at the competency is that it's a part of a professional development, right? And again, it's similar to what Lourdes said, the way you develop your competency program makes a fundamental difference versus not. If we just do it like a dry card, here's your checkoff list, let's go. Yes, it's going to be different. But if you utilize it as the basis to establish, where your staff weaknesses, where your staff strengths, how do I going to cater to their weaknesses to develop them, to build them up, right? Then it's not going to be a fundamental difference. regardless, competency is a big part of professional development. I think the difference between competency and professional development is that professional development may include more of like knowledge education courses, or participation in certain conferences, or participation maybe with a certain organization like American Nurses Association, right, where you're a professional organization, or Physical Therapists Association, where you become part of it too, and take on their conferences and courses that are more of education, where we still focus a bit more on a skill aspect of things, but we also try to incorporate the knowledge. And again, like Lourdes was saying, we're talking about regulatory, from the perspective of regulation, we're talking about ways of documentation. So you not just strictly focusing on just skill, as we're seeing in, like blood pressure and using your nursing bag and all of this stuff, but growing from there and turning this competency more into training makes it, I think, very close to what we understand under the term of professional development. So again, kind of going back to answering the question, is it a huge difference? I'd say if done correctly, it's not a huge difference between the professional development and competency, but definitely competency is always a part of one's professional development.
Okay, that makes sense. So what are some of the obstacles that agencies commonly face when they are trying to facilitate these competency programs for either new staff or existing staff? Like what do they need to do to overcome them?
Well, I think lots of the time it's I guess the easiest thing to discuss as an obstacle would be lack of resources, right? Not having maybe a dedicated individual who's taking ownership of creating a certain, robust competency program within the organization. So that's always one of the biggest things. When we talk about larger companies, corporations, they tend to have more resources available for their staff like that. When this mid-sized small agencies, not necessarily. And so again, that kind of all goes to the back burner, and that becomes a big obstacle. I think another piece that is an obstacle is the mindset that we develop as the leadership within an organization, and then trickle it down to our personnel, right? So how to deal with this obstacle, I don't know. We've been really trying to work on that with local agencies nationwide to kind of try to have them see what's the benefit of the appropriate competency program can be. A good example of that could be VNA. They've been utilizing competency-based process for years, and they even have articles and research articles written about that, where it shows that it really pays off eventually. It's have to look at it as a long-term investment, and commit to this. So I think the most difficult obstacle, I think, is that changing the mindset. And I'm sorry if you guys hear extra noise. I have all this landscaping going on here. I know they cut grass, yeah, but
is there grass to cut in November?
I know, yes, so great too.
There's usually snow on the ground.
So this is definitely this is the obstacle that staff may experience from leadership. This is the obstacle sometimes that we experience, right, working with our clients as well. And it's always very refreshing when you have an agency, like we just had a conversation with our new client that will be onboarding, who said, we really want to try it out, and we want to check and monitor if we get a greater retention from our staff if we invest in their training and competency. That was just so refreshing to hear. So we hope that there's more people who see that, and we're always open to to those discussions. That's why I think people might be getting kind of bored of us talking about the same thing over and over again. We've done trainings on this topic, we've done now podcasts and everything, but it's really important to see the value that is there, and so those are right. Those are to me, those are the biggest obstacles.
Lourdes, did you have anything?
No, I think it's time, resources, and perception. And so I think it goes back to changing that paradigm like we talked about, and then, encouraging agencies to find ways that are helpful in terms of tying why Where's the investment, paying off? So we're kind of pioneering here. I don't think, obviously this is not something that has been commonplace in our industry. And so back to that passion, we've identified this need through all of our experiences. We'd even love to help with collecting data as we continue with this program, for example, because I just think it's a little bit of a pioneering thing here. But it's about improving patient outcomes. Everybody's in a staffing emergency right now. Nobody has enough staff. So anything you can do to make that staff happy and want to stay is a good investment in addition to improving your patient outcomes.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. So just to dig a little bit more into that time and resources issue, I know that you guys have just launched a virtual training program. Does that help solve some of that issue in terms of time and resources? Like I imagine an in-person training, if somebody uses a vendor, is going to be much more consuming of time and resources, like money. It's going to be more expensive than maybe a virtual training, but maybe I've got that wrong. So how does the training programs that you guys offer provide a solution for those pretty big hurdles?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily, the higher investment is more if they're able to physically get here, right? It takes a little time to arrive, depending where you're driving from. I'll let Irina answer to that, but I don't think it's necessarily more or less for the agency per person necessarily if you're outsourcing that way. The virtual helps us, we've serviced clients in different states. We had a multi-agency organization that chose to use us for all of their 70-something, nurses because they didn't have somebody who could manage all of that, right? So that was something that we partnered with them on and hope to follow up and see, how that looks for them. So I think it's the key here with those resources is making it accessible, making it not something that, it's not valuable time spent and then it takes away from everything. So the beauty of the virtual offering is that they can attend from any place anywhere, in their comfort and then be able to do that. We've also started doing where a component, because we know how valuable time is and people don't have a chunk of time sometimes. So we're trying to keep the interactive skills piece to a couple hours ideally, right? And so we've taken a lot of the extra stuff that we offer, the didactic stuff, and we've made it on demand. So our attendees, whether it's in person or live, for example, they're assigned these videos. They can, watch them at their convenience. Maybe they can even listen a little bit if they're on the road kind of thing. But we're trying to make it also fit the busy home health clinician schedule and make it a little bit more digestible in smaller pieces, and then maximizing our time, with them and trying to keep it as efficient as possible, which is part of the challenge. So I hope that helps answer your question. We're trying to get creative with how to make it more convenient to get the benefit as well as meet the need by feedback from our customers.
Right. And we try to listen to what our customers say, right? Because it's relatively new what we're doing, right? There's all different programs out there. There's other companies who do competency pieces, but I think what we do is different because our skills competency, where we really talk about skills and requirements and bring it down to the home health, what Lourdes does a lot is that it's live. We're keeping it live, so there's that interaction component. But we always like to, so this is valuable for us to preserve, but we also with that always like to listen to the input from our customers, right? Because again, we're learning as we go with them along. And like Lourdes said, having an in-person session for 4 hours, maybe not super feasible in somebody's schedule when they still have to go and see the patient. Although we had a nurse who did her competency while she was seeing the patient. We had that. Oh. Yeah, that happens too. But
life practice
on the subject. We're all very
multitasking.
Yeah, very resilient people here. So we're kind of trying to find the way. But so we had that. But so that's why, the idea came. Okay, so maybe we can minimize the time that we provide the information that is more of a theory, knowledge, regulatory base, and turn it into the on-demand video, but still preserve the one-on-one live interaction when it comes to skills and kind of, quizzing people as we go. So we want to preserve that. And then also, to save the time. And so the virtual piece, this is where it helps. So if you have a choice between in person versus virtual, if you're in Colorado, great. But if you're nationwide and you want to participate in the program, I think you should be able to find 2 hours, 2.5 hours, for your nurse to find the time and get through this in a virtual manner. So a little bit more time saving, and let's say we're constantly thinking about how to make it as valuable, not to take away from quality of the product, but do it more manageable in time for our participants.
I like that. So you're making it more accessible to the market at large, but you're not sacrificing that in-person touch, which is super important when it comes to skills.
Right.
You have to have eyeballs and real-time feedback on what you're doing with your hands is right or wrong. So I like that. Thinking like an agency owner here, do you guys recommend establishing an in-house or internal competency program, or should everybody outsource their competency program to a third-party vendor? And are there situations where one might be better than the other? Can you help me as an owner kind of think through that little problem?
Of course you have outsourced. I would never.
Always outsource.
I would never say anything like that.
Trick question.
Right. But you just have to, I think, weigh in where do you have a person who can be designated as a leader, right, in building a competency program within your organization? If you're able to, that's wonderful, right? Because you're still going to keep it all within your company, but this person has to have all the necessary skills and qualifications on their own, right? So you have to know, do I have somebody like that? Am I able to afford somebody like that? Am I going to be able to provide certain equipment within the organization to sort of create a mini skill lab, if you have to think about that? Because sometimes we don't have a patient on TPN for 6 months, right, on care. And then we have somebody, nobody remembers how to do it. So you have to have certain things within the office to practice and to have your hands on. So you have to estimate all of those things. Am I going to be able to have that? Am I going to be able to do it long term? Is it sustainable for my organization? And if your answer is yes, then absolutely, you can do it on your own. But if you're hesitant, or you feel like it's going to be an extra administrative burden, an extra administrative cost, then I think that you probably would be better off, outsourcing. And another thing too, you have to think about is that even if you decide, okay, I might have a person, I may have resources, but I guess the individual who's going to take charge of it, if they don't feel that they're going to have an ability to constantly stay on top of things in terms of, what's new in the industry, monitoring any evidence-based materials, articles, anything like that, you might be better off outsourcing just because, and again, it has to be, so do your due diligence, right, and check things out. But the organization, like ours, for example, we take pride in trying to stay on top of all the information, regulatory and, clinical. And so having this resource of information flowing from the third-party vendor to your agency could be another plus in considering, okay, am I outsourcing versus am I going to be able to do it to manage that on my own?
Yeah, it sounds like a lot to consider. I wasn't even thinking about, you have to buy all the skills, equipment, and all these things. And it sounds like if you don't have the resources to have a person who's full-time devoted to executing that program, that makes a lot of sense to outsource to a third party. And just being mindful of the time here. I know we're about to draw to a close, and I want to thank you because this has been very valuable to talk through this and think about this. And I'm sure that our listeners got a lot of value from it. But before we close, I want to make sure that everybody is aware of the offer that you're extending to our listeners. So for all you folks out there, the first 10 individuals to contact Amity Healthcare Group with a reference to this particular podcast is going to receive a competency trial for one staff member. And that's super generous. So thank you guys for that. And I want to make sure that the listeners have a way to get in touch with you. So please share with them how to reach you, and if there's any exciting updates on things that you're going to offer in 2022, please share that with us so we can take advantage.
Absolutely. I'll let Lourdes share good news that we're developing a little bit of a new program. I'll share the contact information meanwhile before I remember and get my numbers straight. So you guys are welcome to call us directly. I will give you 2 phone numbers just in case. Our office number is 303-690-2749. And you are welcome to call me directly on my cell phone. Always available for discussion or whatever questions you may have after today's podcast. 720-353-7249. And you can always check us out also on our website, which is www.amityhealthcaregroup.com, and go under the services section there, and you'll find all the information about competencies right there. And because Lourdes has been such an integral part of developing our new product, I'll let her share what's going on.
Yeah, so we're going to continue. We have, kind of an overview general program for initial and annual, depending how agencies want to use that. And the content, between our on-demand portion as well as the live skills, whether it's in person or virtual, we kind of do the umbrella of all the general things, right? Wounds, wound vacs. We cover ostomies and central line care, Foley catheters, point of care. So all the general stuff that people see in most home health, adult visit agencies. And then that on-demand piece really goes deep into like the documentation, do's and don'ts, OASIS for those RNs, things like that. But we're also finding, again, because the rules are gray, maybe for continuing, this can be for professional development. This can be for a component of annual competency, maybe for a nurse who is experienced, but maybe now they want, for example, trach skills, and that's not something they've done in a very long time. So we're going to have coming up on our schedule in January some specialty modules where if you really want to hone in and specialize on central line care, IV infusion, for example, we're going to have one on that. We're going to have one on respiratory care, which is mostly trach care focused, right? And things like nebulizer, treatments and things geared to that. We're going to have one that goes deep dive into wound care. It'll still go into the negative pressure wound therapy, but I'm also going to offer a comprehensive, like, hey, you have this closet of products and you got to choose stuff and recommend things to the physician, right? So it's not a whole class, but it's a little bit of a primer for nurses who don't feel very confident in wound care, which is so big. We go over staging, measuring, all of that fun stuff. And then we're going to have one that's more like GI/GU focused on tubes and ostomies and Foley and things of that nature. So yes, that's what we're excited to be bringing in the coming year, and then to grow and then work with our customers on expanding and tweaking and helping out.
That's exciting. And I bet you're going to have a lot of people sign up for that respiratory. Yes. Really relevant right now.
You know about it or you don't. Yeah.
Yes, right. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. There might be some new things to learn with COVID in the home as well.
Absolutely.
So I'm excited. I'd love to. We'll stay in touch. I'll get an update on how all of that's going after the first of the year.
Yeah. So we just wanted to offer a little bit more of a a la carte menu that people can pick and choose from, as their ongoing learning is taking place.
Yeah. So you're taking care of the competency, but also contributing to their personal development. So it's clever. It all flows together. All right, ladies. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. And thank you for sharing your knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
Home Health 360 is presented by AlayaCare. First off, I want to thank our amazing guests and listeners. To get more episodes, you can go to alayacare.com/Home Health 360. That's spelled Home Health 360, or search Home Health 360 on any of your favorite podcasting platforms. The easiest way to stay up to date on our new shows is to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We also have a newsletter you can sign up for on alayacare.com/Home Health 360 to get alerts for new shows and more valuable content from AlayaCare right into your inbox. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.